Grace Whitmore's world ended when her father shook hands with the devil. Not a demon from his Sunday sermons, a 7-foot killer named Colton Hayes, who'd just paid $200 for her like she was livestock. "She's yours now," Reverend Samuel Whitmore said, pocketing the coins without meeting her eyes. Hayes's voice came low and absolute. "Get your things, girl." Grace had no things, no choices, no future, except whatever waited in those cold, dark eyes staring back at her. Before we continue Grace's journey, please subscribe to our channel and stay with us until the very end of this story. Comment below with your city so we can see how far Grace's story travels across the world. Now let's begin. The trading post reeked of sweat and tobacco. Grace stood in the corner shadows beside her father, trying to disappear. 19 years old, and she still didn't understand why the Reverend had dragged her here before dawn. He never took her anywhere except church. "Stand straight," he hissed, "and keep your mouth shut." Grace obeyed. Obedience was survival. She'd learned that lesson with his belt across her back. Men haggled over pelts and ammunition. Their voices blurred together until the door opened and everything stopped. The man who entered had to actually duck or crack his skull on the frame. Massive didn't cover it. He was built like a mountain wore human skin. Dark coat, darker hat, a revolver that looked used. His boots hit the floor like judgments. The room held its breath. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. "That's Colton Hayes." Grace felt her father's hand clamp onto her arm, fingers digging through fabric to bone. She'd heard the name before. Gunslinger. Killer. The kind of man decent people crossed streets to avoid. Hayes moved through the trading post like death itself, and men scattered. His eyes, black empty, swept the room and locked on Reverend Whitmore. Her father smiled, that false preacher smile he used for offerings. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "right on time." "Reverend?" Hayes's voice was gravel. "This her. My daughter Grace. Grace, greet Mr. Hayes." Grace couldn't move. The man was terror made flesh. "Hello," she managed. Hayes looked at her. Really looked. Something flickered behind those dead eyes. Recognition maybe, or pity she didn't want. "She'll do," Hayes said. He reached into his coat. The leather pouch hit the counter with a heavy thunk. 200, Hayes said. As agreed. The floor disappeared. "What?" Grace's voice cracked. "Father, what's he?" "Quiet." Reverend Whitmore's hand shot to her jaw, gripping hard enough to bruise. "Speak when spoken to. Do you understand?" Tears burned, but Grace knew better than to let them fall. "Yes, sir." He released her and reached for the pouch. His fingers, the same fingers that held the Bible every Sunday, closed around it with greedy certainty. He didn't count the money. Didn't need to. "She's yours now, Hayes," her father said. "Our business is complete." Yours. The word detonated in Grace's chest. Her father had just sold her. Sold her like the horses outside, like the pelts on the wall, for money he was already pocketing. "No." Grace grabbed her father's coat. "No, please, father. What are you doing? Why?" "It's done." He didn't look at her. Wouldn't look at her. "You'll go with Mr. Hayes. You'll obey him. It's God's will, Grace." "God's will?" Grace's voice rose, shaking. "You're selling me to a—" His hand moved to his belt. Grace flinched backward, stumbling into a barrel. Hayes was there. Between them. One moment at the counter, the next blocking her father like a wall. "She's mine now," Hayes said quietly. "You don't touch her again." The trading post froze. Reverend Whitmore's face went purple. "Now you listen?" "No." Hayes's hand didn't move toward his gun. Didn't need to. The threat lived in his stillness. "You got paid. Transaction's done. Walk away, Reverend, while you still can." For 3 heartbeats, Grace thought her father would fight. His pride was vicious, fed by years of pulpit power. But Hayes was something else entirely. Something that made smart men walk away. "You'll answer to God for this," Reverend Whitmore said. "I'll answer to him for plenty," Hayes said. "This won't make the list." Her father left. No goodbye, no explanation, no backward glance, just gone with $200 in his pocket and his daughter left behind like trash. Grace stood shaking her mind, unable to process what had just happened. Hayes turned to face her. Up close, he was worse scars on his knuckles' jaw, like carved stone eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. "Please don't hurt me," Grace whispered. Something in his expression shifted, softened barely. "Get your things," he said. "I don't have anything." Hayes looked at her threadbare dress, the worn shoes, the complete absence of possessions. His jaw tightened. "Then we leave now. Stay close to me." He walked to the door, stopped, looked back. Grace's options crystallized with brutal clarity: go with the killer or stay here with men whose stares made her skin crawl. Her father was gone. She had no money, no skills, nowhere to run in Wyoming Territory. She took a step, then another. "Smart girl," Hayes said. Not mocking, just fact. Outside morning sun hurt her eyes. Hayes led her to a massive black horse that looked as mean as its owner. He swung up into the saddle, then extended his hand down. Grace stared at it. Scarred. Dangerous. Steady. She took it. Hayes pulled her up behind him, like she weighed nothing. "Hold on," he said. "Long ride ahead." Grace wrapped her arms around his waist because falling would kill her. Through his coat, she felt solid muscle-controlled power. She'd never touched a man before except when her father hit her. They rode out fast. Grace watched the trading post disappear, then the settlement, then everything she'd ever known. "Where are we going?" she asked after an hour of silence. "My canyon, 3 hours north, private." "Why did you buy me?" "Didn't." Grace's breath caught. "But you paid." "Paid your father what the Morrison brothers would have paid him," Hayes said. "Intercepted their deal. You were being sold either way. Now you're with me instead of them." The words didn't make sense. "Who are the Morrison brothers?" "Slavers. They run girls from desperate situations to brothels, work camps, places that destroy people. Your father made arrangements with them 2 weeks ago." Grace's stomach lurched. "That's a lie. My father's a preacher." "Your father's a liar wearing a collar," Hayes said flatly. "He's been selling girls to the Morrisons for 3 years. You're number 7. I found out too late to save the others. Not too late for you." The horse's rhythm became the only real thing. One hoof, then another. Grace's mind spun trying to reject the information, but pieces clicked together with sickening certainty. The way her father had smiled at Hayes, the practiced ease of taking the money, the complete absence of hesitation or regret. "He knew," Grace whispered. "He knew what they'd do to me." Yes. One word. No comfort in it. Just truth. "So you bought me to save me," Grace said. "Bought you away from worse," Hayes corrected. "Whether that makes things better remains to be seen." The honesty was brutal. Grace had expected lies, manipulation, false promises. Instead, Hayes laid out reality like cards on a table. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we ride. Then you eat, you rest, you breathe. After that, you decide." "Decide what? I'm yours. You paid for me." Hayes pulled the horse to a stop, turned in the saddle to look at her directly. "Nobody owns you, Grace," he said. "Not your father, not the Morrisons, not me. You understand, nobody." Grace stared at him. Every sermon her father had ever preached insisted otherwise. Daughters belonged to fathers, wives to husbands, women existed to obey. "Then why pay for me?" she whispered. "Because sometimes you play by evil men's rules to stop them from winning," Hayes said. "Doesn't mean I believe those rules." He turned back around and kicked the horse forward. They rode hard for 2 more hours. Grace's body ached, her arms screamed from holding on, But Hayes didn't slow until they entered a canyon with red rock walls rising on both sides. Hidden valley, grass, stream, and against the far wall, a cabin. Hayes dismounted and helped her down. Her legs nearly buckled. "Home," he said simply. Grace looked around. Beautiful. Isolated. Perfect prison, or perfect sanctuary. She couldn't tell which. Hayes led his horse to a small stable. Grace stood in the yard, uncertain, displaced, drowning in too many emotions to name. "You coming?" Hayes called from the cabin door. Grace followed because she had no other choice. Inside surprised her. Clean, organized, stone fireplace with actual fire burning, bookshelves with real books, 2 separate rooms with doors in back. "That one's yours," Hayes said, pointing left. "Door locks from inside. You want privacy, take it." Grace moved to the doorway. Bed with quilts, washstand, window with curtains. More comfort than her father's house where she'd slept on a cot. "Why?" she asked, turning. "If you bought me." "Didn't buy you," Hayes interrupted. "Bought you away from something worse. Difference matters. You're here because here's safer than there, that's all." "But what do you want?" Hayes moved to the fireplace, adding wood. Flames jumped higher. "I want you to eat," he said. "I want you to rest. I want you to stop looking at me like I'm going to hit you, though I understand why you do." He met her eyes. "Past that, we'll figure it out." "I don't understand." "You will." Hayes went to the kitchen area, pulling out bread and dried meat. "Takes time. Right now, you hungry?" She was, starving. She'd been too afraid to eat before the trading post. "Yes." "Then sit." Grace sat. Watched him cut bread, arrange food, pour water. Within minutes, he'd put a meal in front of her. "Eat," he said gently. "All of it." Grace picked up the bread with shaking hands. The first bite tasted like salvation. She hadn't realized how hungry she'd been, how many meals her father had called unnecessary. Hayes sat across from her with his own plate, eating in silence. No staring, no demands, just quiet. When Grace finished, her stomach was full for the first time in memory. "Thank you," she whispered. Hayes nodded. "Water in your room for washing. Quilts if you're cold. Door locks. Need anything, I'm out here. Otherwise, see you morning." Grace stood. This was the moment, when whatever Hayes really wanted would be revealed. But Hayes just sat at the table, not moving, waiting. "Good night," Grace said. "Sleep well." Grace went to her room and closed the door. Found the lock. Turned it. Heard the bolt slide home. Then she stood there shaking. Her father had sold her. To slavers. A stranger had intervened. She was alone with a killer in an isolated canyon, and yet he'd given her food, privacy, a locked door. Grace sank onto the bed as tears finally came. Silent tears, because crying loud had always made it worse. She lay down without undressing, pulling quilts to her chin. Through the door, she heard Hayes moving, quiet sounds of cleaning up, banking the fire. Then silence. Grace closed her eyes and waited for sleep or terror. A soft knock made her freeze. "Grace!" Hayes's voice came through the wood. "You awake?" She didn't answer. "If you are, that's fine." Hayes continued. "Just wanted to say, door stays locked all night. I won't try to open it. You're safe. Nobody did that for me when I was in your position, so I'm doing it for you now." Footsteps retreated. Grace stared at the ceiling, Hayes's words echoing. "Nobody did it for me." What had this man survived? What had taught him to give a locked door to a terrified girl? Her anger crystallized then, sharp and clean and new. Not at Hayes. At her father. At the reverend who'd preached about sin every Sunday while planning to sell his daughter to slavers. who'd punished her for imagined transgressions while committing real atrocities. The hypocrisy was staggering, but so was this a killer who gave her food and privacy and choices, who said, "Nobody owns you," like he meant it, who walked away after locking her in safely. Grace's exhausted mind couldn't reconcile the contradictions. Didn't need to. Not tonight. For the first time in 19 years, she fell asleep without nightmares. Because for the first time in 19 years, the monster was outside her door, standing guard. Grace woke to sunlight streaming through the window and forgot for one blissful second where she was. Then, memory crashed back. Her father's hand taking the money. Hayes's dark eyes the locked door she'd turned herself last night. She sat up slowly, body aching from yesterday's ride. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. Was Hayes still here? Had he left her alone? Or worse, was he waiting outside her door? Grace stood on shaking legs and moved to the door. Her hand hovered over the lock. This was the test, wasn't it? The moment when she'd learn if last night's gentleness had been real or just another trap. She turned the lock, opened the door a crack. Hayes sat at the table reading a book. Coffee steamed in a cup beside him. He looked up when the door creaked, but didn't stand, didn't move toward her. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's hot. Breakfast is bread and eggs if you want them." Grace stood in the doorway, uncertain. "You're still here. Where else would I be?" "I don't know. I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Thought what? That he'd leave, that he'd come for her in the night, that this was all some elaborate cruelty. Hayes closed his book. "You thought a lot of things that didn't happen," he said quietly. "That's going to keep happening for a while. Your father taught you to expect the worst from people. Takes time to unlearn that." The accuracy of his words made Grace's throat tight. "How do you know?" "Because someone taught me the same thing," Hayes said. "Took years to stop flinching at kindness." He stood slowly, keeping distance between them. "You want breakfast or not?" Grace nodded. Hayes moved to the stove and cracked eggs into a pan with practiced efficiency. Grace sat at the table watching his hands, large scarred, surprisingly gentle with the food. "You cook," she said. "Living alone teaches you fast," Hayes replied. "Eat or starve. Seemed like an easy choice." He slid a plate in front of her, eggs, bread, even a small portion of preserves. Grace ate slowly, aware of Hayes at the other end of the table with his own meal. He didn't watch her, didn't speak. Just let her eat in peace. When she finished, Hayes collected the plates. "You know how to read?" he asked. Grace nodded. "My father taught me, said women should read the Bible." "Just the Bible?" "He said other books were sinful distractions." Hayes made a sound that might have been disgust. He walked to the bookshelf and pulled down a volume. "Nothing sinful about knowledge. Here." He handed her the book. Grace looked at the cover. "Shakespeare." "Start with something good," Hayes said. "You don't like it, try another. Got maybe 50 books here. Read whatever you want." Grace held the book like it might explode. Her father had beaten her once for reading a novel she'd found, called it devil's work. And now this killer was handing her Shakespeare like it was nothing. "Why?" she asked for the 100th time. Hayes sat back down with his coffee. "Because you've got a mind, and it deserves to be fed. Because you're going to be here a while, and you'll go crazy with nothing to do. Because I can." He met her eyes. "You don't need a better reason than that." Grace opened the book to the first page. The words swam at first, her mind too fractured to focus. But gradually, slowly, she began to read. Hayes returned to his own book, and they sat in comfortable silence as morning stretched into afternoon. Around noon, Hayes stood. "I've got work outside. Fence needs mending, horse needs exercise. You stay inside, keep the door locked if it makes you feel safer. I'll knock before I come back in." "What kind of work?" Grace asked. "Ranching work. I've got cattle in the upper canyon, need to check on them. Garden needs weeding. Life doesn't stop just because you're here." Grace watched him put on his hat and coat. "Will you come back?" Hayes paused at the door. "Yes, before sundown. I'll bring fresh meat for dinner." He looked at her seriously. "Grace, I'm not leaving you. Not today, not tomorrow. You're stuck with me until we figure out what comes next. Understand?" She nodded, not sure she believed him, but wanting to. Hayes left. Grace heard his footsteps fade, then silence. She was alone, truly alone for the first time since yesterday morning. Grace stood and walked through the cabin, really looking at it now. The books on the shelves, not just Shakespeare, but history, poetry, even medical texts. The kitchen stocked with more food than her father had kept in a month. The fireplace with wood stacked neatly beside it. Everything spoke of the man who lived carefully, deliberately alone. Grace returned to the table in Shakespeare. Reading felt like rebellion, like freedom. She lost herself in the words until the light began to fade. True to his word, Hayes returned before sunset. He knocked before entering, waiting for her to call, "Come in," before opening the door. He carried a wrapped parcel. "Fresh venison," he said. "I'll cook it if you want, or I can teach you." "Teach me," Grace said, surprising herself. Hayes showed her how to prepare the meat, how to season it with herbs from his small garden, how to cook it over the fire without burning. His instructions were clear, patient. When she made mistakes, he corrected gently. "Like this," he'd say, demonstrating. "See, not hard, once you know the trick." They ate together as the cabin filled with the smell of cooked meat and wood smoke. Grace's portion was generous, more than she'd ever been allowed at her father's table. "You're feeding me too much," she said. "You're too thin," Hayes countered. "You need strength. Eat." My father said. "Your father was wrong about damn near everything," Hayes interrupted. "Including how much a woman should eat." Grace put down her fork. "You keep saying that he was wrong. How do you know?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know what it looks like when someone breaks a person down piece by piece. I've seen it. Hell, I've lived it." He met her eyes across the table. "Your father didn't feed your body right, didn't feed your mind right, didn't treat you like a person with value. That's not godliness, Grace. That's cruelty wearing Sunday clothes." "He's still my father," Grace whispered. "Blood doesn't make someone worthy of respect," Hayes said. "Actions do. And his actions sold you to slavers for $200. The words landed like blows. Grace felt tears threatening but pushed them back. She'd cried enough. "Tell me something," she said. "Last night you said nobody did it for you. What did you mean?" Hayes's expression closed off. "Old history. Not relevant." "It's relevant to me." They stared at each other across the table. Grace saw the moment Hayes made his decision, saw him choose to trust her with something he'd clearly buried deep. "I was 8, Hayes said finally. "My parents were dead, no other family. Got sold to a lumber camp up north. Man who ran it, Garrett was his name. He believed in breaking boys early. Make them scared enough they work harder, question less." Hayes's jaw tightened. "He broke plenty. Some died. Some went crazy. I got beaten so much I stopped feeling it after a while." Grace's hand covered her mouth. "How did you escape?" "Killed him." Hayes said it flatly, without emotion. "I was 14. He came at me with a belt and I'd had enough. There was an axe nearby. I used it." He looked at Grace, his eyes dark with memory. "Been running ever since. Fighting ever since. Trying to be something other than what he made me." "That's why you saved me," Grace said, understanding crystallizing. "Because nobody saved you." "That's why I won't let anyone do to you what was done to me," Hayes corrected. "You understand the difference. I'm not saving you, Grace. I'm giving you tools to save yourself. There's a difference." Grace didn't know what to say. This man, this killer everyone feared, was just a boy who'd been beaten until he broke, until he had to become something hard to survive. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be sorry. Be angry. Hayes leaned forward. Your father failed you. Mine failed me. We've got that in common. But we don't have to let their failures define us. We get to choose what comes next. What if I don't know how to choose? Grace asked. Then you learn, Hayes said. I'll teach you, same as I'm teaching you to cook. That night, Grace left her door unlocked. Not open, she wasn't ready for that, but unlocked. It felt like progress, though, of what kind she couldn't say. Days passed. A week. Then 2. Grace fell into rhythms she'd never known, waking without fear, eating without guilt, reading without punishment. Hayes taught her to cook, to tend the garden, to recognize edible plants from poisonous ones. He never touched her, except to demonstrate a task. Never raised his voice, never demanded anything beyond basic courtesy. Grace began to relax, began to breathe. One evening, during a violent thunderstorm, lightning cracked so close the cabin shook. Grace flinched, memories of her father's rage flooding back, how he'd used storms as excuses, claiming God's wrath justified his own. Hayes looked up from his book. You're safe here, he said quietly. The storm outside is the only thing you need to fear. Nothing in this cabin will hurt you. Grace believed him. For the first time, she actually believed him. Thank you, she said. Hayes nodded. For what? For not being him. Something passed across Hayes's face. Pain, recognition, solidarity. Thank you for giving me a chance not to be. That night, Grace slept through the thunder without nightmares. Without fear. Just deep, dreamless sleep that her body had been craving since childhood. She woke feeling different. Lighter somehow, like something heavy had been lifted from her chest. Grace dressed and went to the main room where Hayes was already making breakfast. Morning, he said. Coffee? Please. Grace accepted the cup and sat at the table. Can I ask you something? Always. Why do you live alone out here in this canyon? Hayes was quiet for a moment, measuring his words. Because people are complicated. They want things from you, expect things. Out here, I only have to be myself. No performance, no pretending. He looked at her. Suppose that's changed now. I'm sorry, Grace said. I've disrupted your life. Didn't say it was bad, Hayes replied. Just different. Haven't had conversation in months before you came. Forgot what it was like. Do you miss it? People. Some people. The right people. Hayes poured coffee for himself. Most people I've known wanted something from me, wanted me to kill someone, wanted me to be someone I'm not, wanted me to be smaller so they could feel bigger. Got tired of it, came here. Grace understood that bone deep. My father wanted me to be nothing, just obedient, just quiet, just gone, I suppose. His loss, Hayes said simply. Over breakfast, Grace found herself talking, really talking for the first time in her life. About her mother who'd died when Grace was 10. About how her father had changed after that, become harder, colder. About the beatings, the isolation, the sermons that twisted scripture into weapons. Hayes listened without interrupting, without judgment. When she finished, he said, You survived him. That takes strength most people don't have. I don't feel strong, Grace admitted. Strength isn't always loud, Hayes said. Sometimes it's just getting up the next morning. You've been doing that your whole life. Something in Grace's chest cracked open, then some frozen place that started to thaw. She'd spent so long believing she was weak, broken, worthless. But maybe, just maybe, she was something else entirely. After breakfast, Hayes taught her to shoot. Not inside, he led her to a clearing in the canyon where he'd set up targets against the rock wall. Why do I need to know this? Grace asked, staring at the rifle he'd handed her. Because knowledge is power, Hayes said. Because you should know how to protect yourself. Because I won't always be there. He positioned the rifle in her hands, adjusting her grip. Don't be afraid of it. Respect it, but don't fear it. Grace's hands shook. The weapon felt heavy, dangerous, wrong. "Breathe," Hayes said behind her, his voice calm. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try." Grace pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her backward, but Hayes steadied her. The shot went wide, missing the target completely. "Again," Hayes said. They practiced until Grace's arms ached and her ears rang despite the cloth Hayes had given her to muffle the sound. By the end, she hit the target twice out of 10 tries. "Better," Hayes said, taking the rifle. "We'll practice more tomorrow." "I'll never be good at this," Grace said. "You'll be good enough," Hayes replied. "That's all that matters. You don't need to be the best shot in Wyoming. You just need to make someone think twice before coming for you." Walking back to the cabin, Grace felt different. Capable somehow. Like maybe she wasn't just a victim waiting for the next bad thing to happen. That evening, Hayes asked, "You ever think about what you want to do long term?" Grace looked at him confused. "What I want?" "Yes, what you want for your life." The question was so foreign, Grace had to sit with it. Want. What did she want? She'd never been allowed wants before. Only duties, only obedience. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "That's all right," Hayes said. "You've got time to figure it out. But start thinking about it. Because, Grace, you've got a whole life ahead of you, and you get to choose what it looks like." Choose. That word again. Grace turned it over in her mind like a strange coin. "What if I choose wrong?" she asked. "Then you choose again," Hayes said. "That's how it works. You're not trapped by one decision. You get to keep choosing, keep adjusting, keep trying." Grace went to bed that night with Hayes's words circling her mind. She could choose. She could decide. She could want things. The revelation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Weeks turned into a month. Grace grew stronger physically from regular meals and work, mentally from books and conversation, emotionally from safety and space to heal. She learned to cook full meals, to mend clothes, to identify weather patterns in the sky. Hayes taught her everything he knew patiently and thoroughly. They developed rhythms. Morning coffee and reading. Afternoon work. Grace in the garden. Hayes with the cattle or repairs. Evening meals and conversation. Comfortable silences that felt like companionship rather than isolation. Grace caught herself laughing one afternoon when Hayes told a story about a horse that had outsmarted him. The sound startled her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. Hayes smiled at her reaction, and Grace realized his smiles were rare, valuable things. "You should do that more often," he said. "Laugh. Yes, suits you better than fear." One evening, Grace was washing dishes when she realized something extraordinary. She felt safe. Not just physically safe, emotionally safe. Safe to speak her mind, to make mistakes, to exist without constantly monitoring every word and action. She turned to Hayes, who was banking the fire for the night. "I need to tell you something." He looked up. "Go ahead." "I was terrified of you," Grace said. "That first day I thought you'd bought me for terrible things. I thought you'd hurt me or worse. And I need you to know that I was wrong. Completely wrong. You've been kinder to me than anyone in my entire life, and I'm sorry I judged you before knowing you." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "You weren't wrong to be afraid. You'd just been sold by your father. Fear was the only sane response." He straightened, meeting her eyes. "But thank you for saying that, for trusting me enough to stay." "Thank you for giving me reason to trust," Grace replied. Something shifted between them, then some understanding that hadn't existed before. They weren't just captor and captive, or savior and saved. They were two people who'd survived terrible things and found each other in the aftermath. That night, Grace left her door wide open for the first time. Hayes noticed but said nothing, just nodded good night and went to his own room. Grace lay in bed staring at the open doorway and felt no fear. Only peace. Only safety. Only the quiet certainty that tomorrow would come, and she'd face it without dread for the first time in 19 years. She fell asleep easily, deeply, dreamlessly. Outside her open door, the cabin was quiet. Hayes was in his room. The fire crackled softly. The canyon wind whispered through the rocks. And Grace Whitmore, who'd been sold like property, who'd been taught she was worthless, who'd survived a father's cruelty and a killer's mercy, finally rested. Because the monster she'd feared had turned out to be the first person who'd ever seen her as human. And that changed everything. Grace was hanging laundry when she heard the horses, 3 of them coming fast through the canyon entrance. Her hands froze on the wet sheet heart suddenly hammering. They'd been alone for 6 weeks. Nobody came to the canyon. Nobody even knew they were here. Hayes appeared from the stable, moving with that dangerous calm Grace had learned meant trouble. "Get inside," he said quietly. "Lock the door. Don't come out unless I tell you." "Who are they?" "Don't know yet. Inside, now." Grace ran. Behind her, she heard the horses enter the yard, heard men's voices, rough, confident wrong. She reached the cabin door, fumbled with the handle, got inside. Her hands shook as she turned the lock. Through the window, she watched Hayes stand in the yard, unarmed, as 3 riders circled him. They were dirty, mean-looking, with guns on their hips and cruelty in their postures. The leader, a man with a scar running down his face, dismounted. "Colton Hayes," the scarred man said. "Heard you were hiding out here." "I'm not hiding," Hayes replied. "I'm living. There's a difference." "Heard you got yourself a woman, too." Scarface looked toward the cabin. "Pretty little thing from what they say. Preacher's daughter." Grace's blood went cold. How did they know about her? "You heard wrong," Hayes said. "I live alone." "That's so." Scarface smiled, showing missing teeth. "Because Bill at the trading post says otherwise. Says you bought a girl from Reverend Whitmore about 6 weeks back. Says she was supposed to go to the Morrisons, but you intercepted." Morrison. The name Grace had learned to fear. The slavers who would have destroyed her. "Bill talks too much," Hayes said. "Bill talks for money," Scarface corrected. "And the Morrisons pay good money for information about their lost merchandise." He took a step toward Hayes. "See, they don't like being crossed. Bad for business when word gets out someone stole from them. So they sent us to collect what's theirs and teach you a lesson about interfering." "She's not theirs," Hayes said. "She's not anybody's." "Well, now that's where you're wrong," Scarface gestured to his companions. "Boys, search the cabin. Bring the girl out here." Hayes moved, not toward his gun, toward Scarface. One moment standing still, the next closing the distance between them so fast the man barely had time to flinch. Hayes grabbed him by the throat and actually lifted him off the ground. "You're not touching her," Hayes said quietly. "You're not going near that cabin, and you're going to get back on your horses and leave before I forget I'm trying to be a better man." The other 2 riders drew their guns. Hayes didn't even look at them. "Shoot me, and you die next," Hayes said. "All of you. I'm faster than you think, and meaner than you know. And I will absolutely paint this canyon with your blood before I let you take her." Scarface clawed at Hayes's hand, face turning purple. Hayes held him another moment, then dropped him. The man collapsed, gasping. "Go," Hayes said. Scarface stood slowly, rage and humiliation warring on his face. "You just signed your death warrant, Hayes. Morrison brothers don't forget. They don't forgive. We'll be back with more men, more guns, and we'll burn this whole canyon down around your ears." "I'll be here," Hayes said. The 3 men mounted their horses, Scarface still rubbing his throat. As they rode out, he called back, "Enjoy your last days, Hayes, and tell that girl we'll be real gentle with her, eventually." The riders disappeared through the canyon entrance. Hayes stood in the yard, not moving for a long moment. Then he walked to the cabin and knocked. Grace, they're gone. You can open up. Grace unlocked the door with shaking hands. Hayes stood on the threshold, his expression grim. They're coming back, Grace said. Not a question. Yes. With more men. Probably a dozen, maybe more. Morrison brothers don't make empty threats. When? Few days, week at most. They'll need time to gather men and supplies. Hayes looked at her seriously. Grace, I need to get you out of here. There's a settlement 3 days south. No, Grace said. Grace? No. She stepped forward. You don't get to save me, and then send me away when it gets dangerous. That's not how this works. This isn't about how it works, Hayes said, his voice harder than she'd heard it. This is about keeping you alive. If they come here with 12 men, I can't protect you and fight them both. Then teach me to fight, Grace said. Hayes stared at her. What? You've been teaching me everything else. Teach me this too. Grace's fear was transforming into something else, something hotter, sharper. Anger. Those men want to take me, destroy me, because my father sold me like property. I'm tired of being something that happens to. I want to be someone who fights back. Grace, this isn't shooting targets. This is killing or being killed. I know, Grace said, and I'd rather die fighting beside you than die running alone, or worse, live as what they'd make me. Hayes studied her face for a long moment. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. All right, then we prepare, starting now. The next 3 days were brutal. Hayes taught Grace everything he knew: how to load and shoot faster, how to take cover, how to aim for center mass, instead of trying for precision. He taught her to overcome her hesitation, the natural human resistance to violence. They won't hesitate, Hayes said, as Grace fired at targets he'd set up. They'll kill you without thinking twice. You have to be willing to do the same. Grace's hands steadied on the rifle. She thought about Scarface's smile, about the Morrison brothers who bought and sold women, about her father counting his $200. She pulled the trigger and hit the target dead center. Good, Hayes said. Again. They practiced until Grace's shoulder was bruised from recoil, until she could load and fire without thinking, until her fear transformed into cold determination. Hayes also taught her about cover, about angles, about using the cabin's structure to their advantage. They'll come at dawn most likely, Hayes said on the third evening. That's when people are slowest, least alert. We'll position ourselves here and here. He pointed to windows on opposite sides of the cabin. Gives us crossfire coverage of the yard. They come in shooting, we make them regret it. You've done this before, Grace observed. More times than I want to remember, Hayes admitted. Grace, I need you to understand something. When they come, it's going to be chaos. Loud, confusing, terrifying. You're going to want to freeze. Don't. Keep moving, keep shooting, keep thinking. And if I tell you to run, you run. You don't argue, you don't hesitate, you just go. Understand? Yes, Grace lied. She had no intention of running. That night, neither of them slept much. They sat in the main room with weapons laid out, ammunition counted, positions planned. Hayes cleaned his revolver methodically while Grace watched. Tell me something, she said. If you could go back and not buy me from my father, would you? Hayes looked up. No. Even knowing this would happen. Especially knowing this would happen, Hayes said. Grace, you were going to the Morrisons regardless. At least this way you've had 6 weeks of peace. You've learned you're stronger than you thought, and when this is over, however it ends, you'll know you fought for yourself. That matters. And if we die, then we die free, Hayes said simply. Better than dying in chains. Grace absorbed this. You really believe that? I know it. I lived it. Hayes set down his gun. When I was in that lumber camp, every day I stayed alive in slavery was a day I betrayed myself. The day I killed Garrett and ran, that was the first day I actually lived. even terrified, even alone, even hunted. Because I chose it. That choice made all the difference. I choose this too, Grace said, fighting beside you. I want you to know that. Hayes met her eyes. I know. And Grace, I'm proud of you. Your father raised you to be small and scared. Look at you now. The words landed in Grace's chest like warmth. Nobody had ever said they were proud of her. Nobody had ever seen her as anything worth being proud of. Thank you, she whispered. They maintained watch through the night, taking turns sleeping briefly. Dawn came cold and clear. Hayes positioned Grace at the east window with the rifle, showing her again how to brace it, where to aim. Don't think about the men, he said. Think about the threat. They're not people anymore. They're problems to solve. You understand? Grace nodded, though her stomach churned. Could she really shoot a person? Could she kill? She thought about Scarface's smile, about what would happen to her if Hayes fell and she didn't fight. The nausea settled into resolve. I understand, she said. Hayes took position at the south window with his rifle and revolver. They waited as the sun climbed higher. Nothing happened. Hours passed. Grace's tension ratcheted tighter with each minute. Maybe they weren't coming. Maybe it had been a bluff. Then Hayes went rigid. Riders, coming fast. At least 10, maybe 12. Get ready. Grace's hands found the rifle, her training taking over. Through the window she saw dust rising from the canyon entrance. Then horses appeared, more than 10. 15, maybe more. Armed men riding hard toward the cabin. Jesus, Hayes muttered. They brought an army. The riders spread out surrounding the cabin. Scarface was there, and beside him, a man who radiated authority, older, silver-haired, with eyes like frozen river water. He had to be one of the Morrison brothers. Hayes, the silver-haired man called. I'm Daniel Morrison. You stole something that belongs to me. Send the girl out and we'll make this quick. You'll die, but it'll be painless. Refuse, and we'll make you watch what we do to her before we kill you both. Grace's finger moved to the trigger. Hayes caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Not yet. She doesn't belong to you, Hayes called back. She doesn't belong to anyone. Leave now and you live. Stay and you don't. Simple choice. Morrison laughed. You're outgunned 15-1. You really think... Hayes shot him. One clean shot through Morrison's shoulder, knocking him off his horse. The yard exploded into chaos. Men diving for cover, horses screaming, guns firing wild. Now! Hayes shouted. Grace aimed at the nearest rider and pulled the trigger. The man fell. She didn't let herself think about it, just loaded and fired again. And again. Hayes was firing methodically, each shot dropping a man or forcing them to retreat. But there were too many. Bullets punched through the cabin walls, shattered windows, tore apart furniture. Grace ducked as wood splinters exploded beside her head. She rose and fired, dropped another man. Load. Fire. Load. Fire. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of killing. A bullet grazed her arm. Grace gasped, but kept shooting. Across the room, Hayes was hit in the leg, but didn't slow down. His face was stone, his movements precise. The attackers regrouped, concentrating fire on the south window where Hayes fought. Grace realized what they were doing, overwhelming one position to breach the cabin. Hayes! She screamed. He understood. Hold position. Don't leave your window. But 3 men were already rushing the door. Hayes dropped 2, but the third crashed through. Grace swung her rifle toward him, but he was too close, knocking it from her hands. She scrambled backward as he advanced, pulling a knife. Pretty little thing, he said. Morrison's gonna let me have you first. Hayes's gun roared. The man's head snapped back and he collapsed. But in the second, Hayes was turned. Another attacker burst through the broken south window. Everything slowed. Grace saw the man aim at Hayes's back. Saw Hayes turn too slowly, still recovering from the last shot. Saw the finger tighten on the trigger. Grace grabbed the fallen man's knife and threw it. She'd never thrown a knife in her life, Had no training, no skill, just desperation and instinct. The blade caught the attacker in the throat. He dropped gurgling. Hayes stared at her. "Grace, behind you," she screamed. Hayes spun and fired. Another man fell. But now they were inside, flooding through breaches in the cabin's defenses. 5 attackers, maybe 6. Hayes was reloading. Grace grabbed her rifle from the floor, pumped it, and started shooting point blank. The noise was deafening. The smoke was choking. Men fell and Grace kept firing until the rifle clicked empty. Silence crashed down like thunder. Grace stood in the wreckage, ears ringing, heart-hammering hands, shaking so badly she dropped the rifle. Bodies lay everywhere in the yard, in the doorway, sprawled across the cabin floor. Blood pooled on the wooden boards. The air reeked of gunpowder and death. Hayes was on his feet, wounded but alive, staring at the carnage. "Grace, you all right?" She looked down at herself. Blood on her dress, some hers, some not. Her arm bleeding from the graze, but alive, standing, unbroken. "Yes," she said, shocked by the steadiness in her voice. "I'm all right." A sound from outside made them both turn. Horses, more horses approaching. Grace grabbed for ammunition with shaking hands, but Hayes stopped her. "Wait," he said, moving to the window. Then his shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's the law." Sheriff Wade Morrison rode into the yard with a dozen deputies, surveying the scene with grim satisfaction. He dismounted, eyes sweeping over the bodies, then landing on the wounded Daniel Morrison crawling toward a horse. "Well, well," Sheriff Morrison said. "Looks like you boys went ahead without waiting for me. That's a mistake, Daniel." "Wade," Daniel Morrison spat blood. "This isn't your concern. When you attack citizens in my territory, it becomes my concern." Wade Morrison gestured to his deputies. "Arrest them. Everyone still breathing. They're going to trial for attempted murder, kidnapping, and—" He pulled papers from his coat. "About 15 other charges I've been building against your operation for 2 years. Daniel Morrison's face went white. "You've got nothing. I've got testimony from 6 women you trafficked. I've got financial records. I've got witnesses." Wade turned to Hayes. "And now I've got you to testify about the attempt on Miss Whitmore's life." Grace stepped into the doorway. Wade Morrison's eyes widened. "Miss Whitmore, you're safe." "Yes," Grace said. Then stronger. "Yes, I'm safe." Wade nodded. "I'm sorry we didn't get here sooner. We were tracking the Morrison gang for weeks. When we heard they were gathering men for a raid, we followed." He looked at the bodies. "Though it seems you handled things pretty well yourselves." "We defended our home," Hayes said quietly. "So you did." Wade gestured to the dead. "These men chose their fate when they came here. No jury's going to fault you for defending yourself and Miss Whitmore." As deputies handcuffed survivors, Wade approached Hayes and Grace. "I need you both to come to town. Give official statements. Also," he looked at Grace carefully, "there's something you need to know about your father." Grace's stomach dropped. "What about him?" "He's being arrested too. We found evidence he's been working with the Morrisons for 3 years, selling girls 7, including you, to their trafficking operation. He's going to prison Miss Whitmore for a long time." The world tilted. Grace had known her father sold her. But 7 girls. 3 years. The scope of his evil was staggering. "How many?" she whispered. "How many girls died because of him?" Wade's expression was gentle but honest. 3 confirmed dead, 2 still missing. 1 in a brothel in Montana. We're working on getting her out. And you." Grace's legs gave out. Hayes caught her supporting her weight as she shook. 7 girls. Her father had done this to 7 girls, preached about sin on Sundays and sold daughters on weekdays. "Grace," Hayes said softly. "Breathe. Just breathe." She gasped air into her lungs. 7 girls. She was the only one who'd been saved. The only one who'd been lucky enough, if you could call any of this luck, to be intercepted by someone who cared. I need to testify, Grace said, straightening. Against my father. Against all of them. I need to tell the truth. You will, Wade promised, and your testimony will help us lock them away forever. Grace looked at the bodies in the yard, at the blood on her hands, at the wreckage of the cabin. She'd killed today, had thrown a knife that ended a life, had shot men who were trying to destroy her. The enormity of it pressed down on her chest. But she was alive. She was standing. She was free. And her father was going to pay for what he'd done. Let's go to town, Grace said. I'm ready to tell my story. Hayes squeezed her hand once briefly before letting go. Then let's end this. They left the canyon as the sun reached its peak, riding with the sheriff and his deputies toward a town Grace had never seen. Toward testimony that would destroy her father. Toward justice that came too late for 6 other girls but might save countless more. Grace didn't look back at the cabin. Didn't need to. Whatever happened next, she'd never be that terrified girl at the trading post again. She'd fought for her life and won. She'd faced evil and survived it. And sitting tall on the horse beside Hayes, Grace Whitmore understood something profound: freedom wasn't given. It was taken, defended, fought for with blood and courage and the absolute refusal to be anyone's property ever again. She was free. Finally, terribly, completely free. And nothing would ever chain her again. The town of Stillwater looked nothing like Grace had imagined. 3 days of riding with Sheriff Wade Morrison and his deputies had built it up in her mind as something grand, official, important. Instead, it was just another frontier settlement, wooden buildings, dirt streets, people going about their ordinary lives, while Grace carried the weight of 7 girls' stories on her shoulders. Wade led them to the courthouse, a 2-story structure that served as both government office and jail. People stopped to stare as they passed. Grace kept her eyes forward, aware of Hayes riding beside her, his presence steady and grounding, even as her world threatened to spin apart. Inside, Wade directed them to a small office. "You'll stay at the boarding house across the street," he said. "Mrs. Chen runs it, good woman, discreet. Trial starts in 3 days. That gives you time to rest. Get your statement written. Prepare yourself." 3 days. Grace's voice came out smaller than she intended. "My father's here now." "In a cell downstairs," Wade confirmed. "Along with Daniel Morrison and 8 of his men. The others died in the canyon." He looked at Grace carefully. "Do you want to see him? Your father?" Every cell in Grace's body screamed, no, but something else, something harder, newer said yes. Said she needed to look him in the eye one last time. "Yes," Grace said. "I want to see him." Hayes touched her elbow gently. "Grace, you don't have to." "I know," she interrupted, "but I need to. I need him to see what he didn't destroy." Wade nodded and led them down narrow stairs to the cells below. The air grew cooler, damper. 4 cells lined one wall. Daniel Morrison sat in the first, his shoulder bandaged, his eyes filled with cold hatred as they passed. The other cells held his surviving men, all silent, all defeated. In the last cell sat Reverend Samuel Whitmore. He looked smaller than Grace remembered, thinner. His preacher's clothes were rumpled, his collar missing. When he saw Grace, something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or recognition. But no remorse. No shame. "Grace," he said, "you're alive." "No thanks to you," Grace replied. Her voice was steady cold. She barely recognized it as her own. Her father stood and approached the bars. "I did what I had to do. You wouldn't understand. The church needed funds, the mission work required. You sold 7 girls to slavers." Grace cut him off. 7. 3 are dead, 2 are missing, or 1 is in a brothel. And me, I survived only because Colton Hayes intercepted your transaction. Don't talk to me about mission work." Her father's face hardened. That man is a killer, a sinner. Whatever he told you, he told me the truth, Grace said. Something you never did. He fed me, protected me, taught me I was worth more than you ever believed. He gave me choices. He treated me like a human being. She stepped closer to the bars. You preached about God every Sunday and committed evil every other day. You're not a man of faith. You're just a man who used faith to hide what you really are. How dare you judge me? Her father spat. I'm your father. I raised you. You owe me. I owe you nothing, Grace said, and the words felt like breaking chains. Blood doesn't make you worthy of respect or love or loyalty. Your actions do. And your actions destroyed lives. Including mine, except I survived despite you. Not because of you, despite you. Her father's face went red, then purple. You ungrateful little... That's enough, Hayes said quietly, but the threat in his voice made Reverend Whitmore step back from the bars. Wade moved between them. Miss Whitmore, you've said what you came to say. Let's go. Grace took one last look at her father. He stood in his cell diminished and exposed, all his righteous authority stripped away to reveal the hollow man beneath. She'd been terrified of him her entire life. Now she just felt pity and anger and a strange, fierce satisfaction that he'd finally face consequences. Goodbye, Father, Grace said. I hope you find in prison what you tried to give those 7 girls. I hope you learn what it means to have your freedom taken, your choices stolen, your humanity stripped away. I hope you suffer the way they suffered. Grace? Her father started, but she was already turning away. They climbed the stairs back to Wade's office. Grace's hands were shaking, but her spine was straight. She'd faced him, spoken truth to him, refused to be small anymore. You did good, Hayes said quietly as they stepped outside. I wanted to hurt him, Grace admitted. Is that wrong? It's human, Hayes replied. He hurt you, wanted to destroy you. Being angry about that isn't wrong. It's honest. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was clean, comfortable, and mercifully quiet. The proprietor, a sharp-eyed woman with kind hands, showed Grace and Hayes to separate rooms on the 2nd floor. Meals at 7, noon, and 6, Mrs. Chen said. Hot water for baths in the evening. You need anything you ask. She looked at Grace's bandaged arm. Doctor's 2 buildings down. You should have that looked at properly. Thank you, Grace said. Alone in her room, Grace finally let herself shake. The past 3 days caught up with her all at once. The battle, the killing, the blood, the bodies. She'd ended lives. She'd thrown a knife into a man's throat and watched him die. She'd shot men who were trying to hurt her and felt nothing but grim satisfaction. What did that make her? A knock on her door. Grace, it's me. She opened it. Hayes stood there, cleaned up but still favoring his wounded leg. You all right? He asked. No, Grace said honestly. I killed people, Hayes. Multiple people. And I don't feel guilty the way I should. I feel relieved. Proud even. What's wrong with me? Hayes stepped into the room, closing the door but staying near it, giving her space. Nothing's wrong with you. You defended yourself. You fought for your life. That's not murder, Grace. That's survival. I threw a knife into a man's throat, Grace whispered. I can still see his face, still hear the sound he made. And I'm glad I did it because he would have killed you. What kind of person does that make me? A person who chose life over death, Hayes said. Yours and mine both. Grace, those men came to destroy us. They would have killed me and done worse to you. You didn't start that fight. You finished it. There's a difference. Grace sat on the bed exhausted. My father would say I'm damned now. That killing is a sin no matter the reason. Your father sold 7 girls to slavers, Hayes said bluntly. His opinion on sin doesn't count for much. Despite everything, Grace laughed. It came out broken and slightly hysterical, but it was still a laugh. Hayes smiled slightly. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow, we write your statement. Day after, we prepare for trial. Then we watch justice happen, and we go home. Home. The canyon. Grace realized that's what it had become, home. Not her father's house of rules and punishments, but Hayes's cabin of safety and choices. "Hayes," she said as he turned to leave. "Thank you. For everything. For saving me, teaching me, believing I was worth saving. I wouldn't be alive without you." Hayes paused at the door. "You saved yourself, Grace. I just gave you the tools. What you did with them, that was all you." He left. Grace lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, processing everything. In 3 days, she'd testify. She'd tell the world what her father had done, what the Morrisons had planned, what Hayes had prevented. She'd speak for the girls who couldn't speak anymore. The responsibility felt massive. But so did her resolve. The next morning, Grace sat with Wade Morrison and a court clerk recounting every detail. Her father's abuse, the trading post transaction, Hayes's intervention, the 6 weeks in the canyon, the attack. All of it laid bare in official testimony that made her story real, permanent, undeniable. "This is brave what you're doing," Wade said when they finished. "Testifying against your father that takes courage most people don't have." "It's not courage," Grace said. "It's obligation. To the girls who didn't survive. To the ones still missing. They deserve to have their story told." "They do," Wade agreed. "And you're telling it beautifully." That afternoon, the town doctor examined Grace's arm. The bullet graze was healing cleanly, he said. She'd have a scar, but nothing worse. He also checked her ribs, her bruises, the old marks on her back from her father's belt. "You've been through hell," the doctor said quietly. "I survived hell," Grace corrected. "There's a difference." Over dinner at the boarding house, Hayes told Grace about his own testimony. He'd given details about the Morrison operation, about their trafficking routes, about the girls he'd heard about but couldn't save. His voice was matter-of-fact clinical, but Grace saw the pain underneath. "You carry them with you," she said. "The ones you couldn't save." Hayes met her eyes. "Every day. 7 girls, Grace. I knew about them, and I wasn't fast enough. Wasn't smart enough. By the time I found out about the arrangements, 6 were already gone." "You saved me," Grace said. "That doesn't make up for the others." "No," Grace agreed. "But it matters. To me, it matters everything." They sat in silence for a moment, 2 survivors carrying their respective ghosts. "What happens after the trial?" Grace asked. "Do we go back to the canyon?" "That depends on you," Hayes said. "Grace, you're free now. Truly free. Your father's going to prison. The Morrisons are finished. Nobody owns you. Nobody's hunting you. You can go anywhere, do anything. You don't have to stay with me." The words hit Grace like a physical blow. "You don't want me there." "That's not what I said," Hayes replied quickly. "I'm saying you have choices now. Real choices. You could stay in town, get a job, build a life around people. You could travel. You could do anything. Being with me in that isolated canyon, that's not much of a life for someone young with possibilities." Grace stared at him. "Are you trying to get rid of me?" "I'm trying to give you freedom," Hayes said. "Real freedom, not just survival." "And what if I choose you?" Grace asked. "What if I choose the canyon, and the quiet, and the life we've been building? What if that's what I want?" Hayes looked uncomfortable. "Grace, you've only known one life, your father's cruelty. And then you knew mine, which is better, but it's still isolated, still limited. You should see what else exists before you decide." "I'm not a child," Grace said, anger rising. "I'm 19 years old. I've survived abuse trafficking, a battle that nearly killed me. I've killed men to defend myself. Don't treat me like I don't know my own mind." "I'm not." "Yes, you are," Grace interrupted. "You're deciding what's best for me without asking what I actually want, just like my father did. Different motivation maybe, but same result, someone else making my choices. Hayes went still. That's not fair. Isn't it? Grace stood. You said I get to choose, so let me choose. Stop protecting me from my own decisions and let me actually make them. She left the dining room before Hayes could respond, climbing the stairs to her room with tears burning behind her eyes. Why was he pushing her away? After everything they'd been through, everything they'd survived together. Why couldn't he just let her stay? Grace lay awake that night, anger and hurt churning in her chest. She'd thought they were building something. Partnership. Trust. Maybe more, though she hadn't let herself examine that possibility too closely. But Hayes was treating her like a temporary responsibility, like someone he'd helped and could now discharge. Maybe that's all she'd ever been to him, a rescued girl, a project, a way to atone for the children he hadn't saved from that lumber camp. The thought hurt worse than the bullet graze. Morning came too soon. Trial day. Grace dressed carefully in a simple dress Mrs. Chen had provided gray modest appropriate for court. She braided her hair back, examined her reflection, and barely recognized herself. 2 months ago, she'd been a frightened girl who flinched at shadows. Now she was someone who'd fought killers and won. Someone who'd told her father the truth. Someone who'd chosen courage over comfort. Hayes was waiting downstairs, also dressed carefully. They didn't speak as they walked to the courthouse, the silence between them awkward and heavy. The courtroom was packed. Townspeople filled every seat, curious about the Reverend's fall from grace. Daniel Morrison sat at one table with his remaining men all shackled. At another table sat Reverend Samuel Whitmore, alone, his expression cold and distant. Grace took her seat in the witness area, Hayes beside her. The judge entered, a stern-faced woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, and called the court to order. This is a preliminary hearing. Judge Hamilton said, to determine if sufficient evidence exists to proceed to full trial. We'll hear testimony from key witnesses, examine evidence, and make our determination. Mr. Morrison, Reverend Whitmore, you'll have your opportunity to respond. Wade Morrison stood and began laying out the prosecution's case. Financial records proving payment to the Reverend. Testimony from 2 other girls who'd escaped Morrison's operation. Evidence of trafficking routes and safe houses. Documentation of 7 transactions between Reverend Whitmore and the Morrison brothers over 3 years. The scope of it was staggering. Grace listened as Wade detailed each girl's story, where they'd come from, what had been promised, what had actually happened. 3 confirmed dead. 2 missing, presumed dead. 1 in Montana, traumatized and struggling. And Grace. The prosecution calls Grace Whitmore to the stand. Grace stood on shaking legs, crossed to the witness chair, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The irony wasn't lost on her, her father's holy book now used to condemn him. Wade approached gently. Miss Whitmore, please tell the court about the morning of September 15th. Grace took a breath and began. She told everything. Her father's abuse, his twisted theology, the trading post, the sale. Her voice shook at first but grew stronger as she spoke. She described Hayes's intervention, the 6 weeks in the canyon, the attack by Morrison's men. And when they came for you, Wade asked, what did you do? I fought, Grace said simply. Mr. Hayes taught me to defend myself. When Morrison's men attacked, I fought for my life. I killed men who were trying to kill us, and I'd do it again. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Judge Hamilton banged her gavel for silence. Miss Whitmore, the judge said, you're saying you killed multiple attackers. Yes, Your Honor, Grace said. In self-defense. They came to murder Mr. Hayes and take me to be sold. I refused to let that happen. A 19-year-old girl fought off trained killers. Daniel Morrison's lawyer stood sneering. That's hardly believable. Believe what you want, Grace said, meeting his eyes. I have the scars to prove it. and the bodies in the canyon speak for themselves." Judge Hamilton studied Grace for a long moment. "Continue, Sheriff Morrison." Wade led Grace through more testimony details about the attack, about her father's crimes, about the other girls. When he finished, Morrison's lawyer approached for cross-examination. "Miss Whitmore, isn't it true that Colton Hayes is a known killer, a wanted man in 3 territories?" "He was wanted," Grace said, "for crimes committed as a child defending himself from abuse. Those warrants have been vacated. He's not wanted anymore." "But he is a violent man," the lawyer pressed. "He's a man who survived violence," Grace corrected, "and who uses that experience to protect people who can't protect themselves. He saved my life, multiple times. That's not violence. That's justice." The lawyer tried several more angles, but Grace didn't waver. She spoke truth clearly, calmly, refusing to be intimidated or confused. After an hour, he gave up. "The prosecution calls Colton Hayes to the stand." Hayes stood and walked forward. He looked uncomfortable in his clean clothes, out of place in the formal setting, but when he took the oath and sat down, his voice was steady. Wade walked him through his testimony, how he'd learned about the Reverend's arrangement with the Morrisons, how he'd intercepted Grace's sale, how he'd protected her from the attack. Hayes spoke matter-of-factly, without drama or embellishment. "Mr. Hayes," Wade said, "why did you help Miss Whitmore? You didn't know her. She wasn't your responsibility." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Because I was her once. A child sold into abuse by people who should have protected me. Nobody helped me. I survived, but barely. When I learned about the Reverend's arrangement, I couldn't—" His voice caught. "I couldn't let it happen again, not when I could stop it. So you intercepted the sale." "I paid what the Morrisons would have paid," Hayes confirmed. "Took Grace to safety, taught her to protect herself. And when they came for her, we fought them off together." Morrison's lawyer approached for cross-examination. "Mr. Hayes, you've killed how many men in your life?" "Too many," Hayes said quietly. "And yet, you want this court to believe you're some kind of hero." "I don't want this court to believe anything except the truth," Hayes said. "I'm not a hero. I'm someone who's done terrible things trying to survive in a terrible world. But what I did for Grace wasn't terrible. It was necessary. She was going to be destroyed. I prevented that. Whatever else I am, I'm proud of that." The lawyer tried to paint Hayes as a violent criminal who'd kidnapped Grace for his own purposes. But Grace stood suddenly from her seat. "That's a lie," she said loudly. Judge Hamilton frowned. "Miss Whitmore, you're out of order." "I don't care," Grace said. "I won't sit here and listen to lies about the man who saved my life. Colton Hayes didn't kidnap me. He rescued me. He treated me with more respect and kindness than my own father ever did. He taught me I had value. He gave me choices. And when evil men came to destroy us both, he fought beside me as an equal. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty too. Arrest me alongside him. But don't you dare call him a criminal for being the only person who ever treated me like a human being." The courtroom erupted. Judge Hamilton banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order, order in this court." When silence finally fell, the judge looked at Grace with something like respect. "Miss Whitmore, return to your seat. Mr. Hayes, you're dismissed from the stand." The trial continued for hours. More witnesses, more evidence. The Reverend sat silent through all of it, his face revealing nothing. But when Judge Hamilton asked if he had anything to say in his defense, he stood. "I regret nothing," Reverend Whitmore said. "I did what was necessary to fund God's work. These girls, they were going to fall into sin anyway. Better they serve a purpose than waste their lives on frivolous pursuits." The courtroom went deadly silent. Even his own lawyer looked horrified. "You believe that?" Judge Hamilton asked quietly. "You truly believe selling children to slavers serves God?" "I believe women exist to serve," the Reverend said. "My daughter exists to serve. She's mine to do with as I see fit. Scripture says a lot of things." Judge Hamilton interrupted, her voice like iron. And men like you have twisted those words to justify evil since the beginning of time. But not in my courtroom. Not today." She looked at her notes, then back at the Reverend. "Samuel Whitmore, based on the testimony and evidence presented, I'm ordering you to stand trial for 7 counts of human trafficking conspiracy to commit murder, child endangerment, and fraud. Bail is denied. You'll remain in custody until trial." She turned to Daniel Morrison. "Daniel Morrison and Associates, you'll also stand trial for trafficking, attempted murder conspiracy, and racketeering. Bail denied. Trial date is set for 6 weeks from today." The gavel came down like judgment. Guards led the prisoners away. Grace watched her father go his back straight, his pride unbroken even in defeat. She felt nothing looking at him. No love, no hate, no connection. Just emptiness where a daughter's love should have been. Outside the courthouse, townspeople surrounded Grace and Hayes. Some thanked them. Others just stared, trying to reconcile the young woman with the stories they'd heard. Grace pushed through them, needing air, needing space. Hayes followed her to a quiet area behind the courthouse. They stood in silence for a long moment. "I'm sorry," Hayes said finally, "for what I said at dinner, about you leaving. I was trying to give you freedom, but I was really just protecting myself." "From what?" Grace asked. "From you leaving eventually," Hayes admitted. "Grace, you're young, smart, capable. You've got your whole life ahead of you. I'm a middle-aged killer living in isolation because I don't fit anywhere else. I convinced myself you'd figure that out and leave anyway, so I should push you away first. Save us both the pain." He looked at her. "But that was cowardice. And you deserve better than my cowardice." Grace stepped closer. "You want to know what I deserve? I deserve to choose my own life. Make my own decisions. And I choose you. I choose the canyon. I choose the life we're building together. Not because I don't have other options, but because that's what I actually want." "Why?" Hayes asked, genuinely confused. "Because you see me," Grace said simply. "Really see me. Not as property, not as a project, not as someone to fix or save or control. You see me as a person, complicated, capable, strong. And you respect that. You respect me. That's so rare I can't even explain how precious it is." Hayes stared at her. "Grace, if you stay..." "What are we exactly? I'm not your father, not your owner. But I'm not sure what else I am to you." "You're my partner," Grace said. "My friend. The person I trust most in the world. And maybe..." She hesitated, then pushed forward. "Maybe more than that if you'll let us find out." Something in Hayes's expression cracked open. "Grace, I'm 20 years older than you. I'm damaged in ways I can't even explain. I've done things that would horrify you if you knew details. You deserve someone better." "Stop deciding what I deserve," Grace said. "I know what you are. I've seen you kill. I've heard you scream in your sleep from nightmares you won't talk about. I know you're broken and difficult and damaged, and I'm choosing you anyway. Not despite those things, but including them. Because I'm damaged too. We're both survivors trying to figure out how to live after survival. Maybe we can do that better together." Hayes reached out slowly and touched her face, his rough hand gentle against her cheek. "If you'll have me," he said quietly, "I'll spend every day earning that choice." Grace leaned into his touch. "Then I'll spend every day reminding you that you already have." They stood there behind the courthouse, 2 broken people who'd found each other in violence and built something like hope in its aftermath. The trial would continue. Her father would go to prison. The Morrisons would pay for their crimes. But Grace and Hayes had each other. Had the canyon. Had a future they could build on their own terms. It wasn't the life Grace had imagined as a child. It was better. It was real. It was chosen. And that made all the difference. They returned to the canyon 3 days after the preliminary hearing, riding side by side as the late afternoon sun painted everything gold. The cabin came into view, and Grace felt something settle in her chest. Homecoming, she realized. This place that had once terrified her now meant safety, possibility, choice. The battle damage was extensive. Bullet holes pocked the walls. Windows were shattered. Blood still stained the porch boards dark. Hayes dismounted and stood surveying the wreckage with an unreadable expression. "We'll rebuild," he said finally. "Stronger this time. Better." "Together," Grace added, sliding down from her horse. Hayes met her eyes. "Together." They spent the next week repairing what could be fixed and replacing what couldn't. Hayes taught Grace carpentry, how to measure boards, drive nails straight, fit new window frames. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her muscles ached. But every nail she drove felt like claiming this space as hers, not just his. One evening, working by lantern light to finish a new window shutter, Grace asked the question that had been building in her mind. "What are we going to do long-term, I mean? We can't just hide in this canyon forever." Hayes set down his hammer. "What do you want to do?" "I want to help," Grace said. "Other girls like me. Girls trapped in situations they can't escape. I want to give them what you gave me a chance." Hayes studied her face in the flickering light. "That's dangerous work. The Morrisons aren't the only traffickers out there. You'd be making yourself a target." "I'm already a target," Grace said. "The Morrison brothers have family. Daniel has a younger brother who wasn't caught. Word's going to spread about what happened here. We could hide, or we could do something that matters." "Grace, I testified against my father and the Morrisons," Grace interrupted. "That testimony's public record. Anyone looking for revenge knows exactly where to find me. Hiding won't make me safer. But fighting, actually doing something to stop what happened to me from happening to others, that gives meaning to what we survived." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "You've thought about this?" "Every night since the trial," Grace admitted. "I can't stop thinking about those 7 girls. About the 2 who are still missing. About how many others are out there right now being sold and destroyed while we rebuild a cabin." She met his eyes. "I survived for a reason, Hayes. I have to believe that. And the reason can't just be my own happiness. It has to be bigger." Hayes stood and walked to the edge of the porch, staring into the darkness beyond the lantern's glow. "If we do this, and I mean if we do it smart. No rushing in like heroes. We gather information, make connections, work with law enforcement when we can. We help the ones we can actually help without getting ourselves killed in the process." "Agreed," Grace said. "And we build something sustainable," Hayes continued. "Not just rescues, but a place for them to go after. Somewhere safe where they can heal, learn skills, figure out what comes next." He turned back to her. "Like what you needed after I brought you here. A locked door, time, choices." Grace's throat tightened. "A school," she said. "We could start a school. Teach girls to read, to defend themselves, to think for themselves. Give them education that makes them independent." "You'd teach?" Hayes asked. "I would," Grace said, surprised by her own certainty. "My father taught me to read to control what I thought. I'd teach girls to read so they could think freely. Teach them mathematics so they could manage money, couldn't be cheated. Teach them their rights under law so they'd know when someone was violating them." Hayes smiled a real smile, rare and precious. "You'd be good at that." "You'd help?" Grace asked. "I'd build the school," Hayes said. "Provide security. Find the girls who need it. But the teaching, that's yours. That's your strength, not mine." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, each processing what they'd just committed to. Finally, Hayes said, "We'll need help. Can't do this alone." "Sheriff Morrison," Grace said immediately. "Wade, he's been fighting trafficking for years. He'd work with us." "And we'll need funding," Hayes added. "Building a school, housing girls, providing food and clothes, that takes money I don't have." Grace thought about the trial, about the testimonies that had filled the courtroom, about the townspeople who'd listened with horror and sympathy. "I could speak," she said. "Tell my story publicly. Ask for support. People want to help, they just need to know how. Grace, that means exposing yourself, making yourself a symbol. You'll never have privacy again. I lost privacy the moment my father sold me at a trading post, Grace said. At least this way I control the narrative. I choose what my story means. It's not about shame or victimhood, it's about survival and fighting back. That's worth losing privacy for. Hayes studied her with something like awe. When did you get so brave? When you taught me I could be, Grace replied simply. The full trial happened 6 weeks later, exactly as Judge Hamilton had scheduled. Grace and Hayes returned to Stillwater, this time with purpose beyond testimony. Grace spoke to community groups, church congregations, anyone who would listen. She told her story, the abuse, the sale, the rescue, the fight. She spoke about the 7 girls her father had trafficked, giving names and faces to abstract horror. The response stunned her. Women wept openly. Men pledged money and resources. A wealthy widow named Margaret Chen, Mrs. Chen's sister-in-law, offered to fund the school's construction. A retired teacher volunteered to help develop curriculum. Sheriff Wade Morrison committed to working with them, officially creating a network for identifying and rescuing trafficked girls. "You're starting something important," Margaret Chen said after one gathering. "This school, it could save dozens of lives, hundreds maybe." "That's the plan," Grace said. The trial itself was brutal. More testimony, more evidence, more horrific details about what the Morrison brothers had done over years of operation. Daniel Morrison remained defiant throughout, showing no remorse, even when faced with testimony from girls his organization had destroyed. Reverend Samuel Whitmore sat silent through most of it, his expression blank. But when given a chance to speak before sentencing, he finally showed emotion, rage. "My daughter was mine to dispose of as I saw fit," he declared from the stand. "Scripture gives fathers authority over daughters. I committed no crime, I exercised my God-given right." Judge Hamilton's face could have been carved from stone. "Mr. Whitmore, your interpretation of Scripture is not only morally bankrupt, it's legally irrelevant. In this country, in this territory, human beings are not property. Daughters are not commodities. You sold 7 young women into slavery, directly causing 3 deaths and immeasurable suffering. That's not religious authority. That's evil." She sentenced him to 30 years in prison. Daniel Morrison got life. His surviving men got sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. The courtroom erupted in applause. Outside reporters surrounded Grace. "Miss Whitmore, how does it feel to see your father convicted?" Grace thought about her answer carefully. "It feels like justice, not just for me, but for every girl he sold, for the 3 who died, for the 2 still missing. I hope this sends a message that selling human beings has consequences, that daughters have value, that women are people, not property." "What will you do now?" another reporter asked. "I'm opening a school," Grace said clearly. "A place where girls escaping abuse and trafficking can learn, heal, and build new lives. Where they'll be taught they have worth, rights, and power over their own futures. It's called Freedom Canyon School, and it opens this spring." The reporters scribbled frantically. Hayes stood behind Grace, solid and supportive, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. That night, back at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, Hayes asked, "Are you sure about this? Once those newspapers print your story, there's no going back. You'll be known everywhere, recognized. People will have opinions about you, your choices, your life with me." "Let them," Grace said. "My father tried to make me invisible, ashamed, small. I'm done being small. If telling my story helps even one girl escape what I escaped, it's worth whatever judgment comes with it." Hayes pulled her close, and Grace leaned into him, feeling his heartbeat steady against her cheek. They'd come so far from that terrified morning at the trading post. She'd been a girl then, broken and afraid. Now she was a woman, scarred, but strong, damaged, but determined. "I love you," Hayes said quietly. "I should have said it before now, but I love you, Grace. Not because I saved you or you saved me, Just because of who you are, brave and fierce, and impossible to break completely. Grace pulled back to look at him. I love you too. You're the first person who ever saw me as human. The first person who let me choose my own path. Even when you were afraid I'd choose wrong, you let me choose. That's love, real love. Not control, not ownership. Just freedom to be myself. Then marry me, Hayes said. Not because you have to, not because society expects it, but because I want to spend my life as your partner, building this school, helping these girls, growing old together in that canyon. Will you? Grace smiled through sudden tears. Yes, but on one condition. Anything. We write our own vows, Grace said. None of that honor and obey nonsense. I want vows that reflect what we actually are: equals, partners, two people who chose each other freely. Deal, Hayes said and kissed her. They married quietly 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the canyon. Judge Hamilton officiated, Sheriff Wade Morrison stood as witness, and Margaret Chen cried happily throughout. Grace wore a simple white dress she'd made herself. Hayes wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed. Their vows were exactly as Grace wanted: honest, equal, chosen. I take you not as property, but as partner, Grace said, her voice steady. Not to obey, but to stand beside. Not because I must, but because I choose to. I promise to respect your choices as you respect mine. To share my strength as you share yours. To build a life together based on freedom, not obligation. For as long as we both shall choose this. Hayes's voice was rough with emotion. I take you not as master, but as equal. Not to control, but to cherish. Not because you need me, but because we're better together. I promise to honor your independence as you honor mine. To defend your right to choose even if you choose to leave. To build a future where love means freedom, not chains. For as long as we both shall choose this. Judge Hamilton pronounced them married, and Grace kissed Hayes as the canyon walls echoed with applause from their small gathering of friends. The reception was simple food, shared stories, told laughter that felt like healing. Margaret Chen pulled Grace aside at one point. You're doing something remarkable, she said. Not just the school, though that's important. You're showing other women what's possible. That survival isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. I hope so, Grace said. I want girls to know that even when terrible things happen, they can still have good lives. Full lives. Lives they choose. You're living proof of that, Margaret replied. Construction on Freedom Canyon School began that spring. Hayes hired men from Stillwater, good men who'd testified at the trial, who believed in what they were building. The school rose quickly. A main building with classrooms, a dormitory, with individual rooms that locked from the inside, a dining hall, a library. Grace spent months developing curriculum with the retired teacher, Miss Sarah Crawford. They focused on practical skills, reading, writing, mathematics, law, self-defense. But also on critical thinking, on questioning authority, on understanding that women deserve the same rights and respect as men. This is radical, Miss Crawford said, reviewing their lesson plans. Teaching girls they're equal to men, that they can question, challenge, refuse. The churches won't like it. The churches can go to hell, Grace said bluntly. My father used religion to justify selling me. I'm not going to teach girls that God wants them to submit to abuse. If that makes me radical, fine. I'm radical. Miss Crawford smiled. Good. The world needs more radical women. The first students arrived in late summer. 3 girls, all rescued from trafficking situations by Sheriff Morrison's expanding network. They were terrified, traumatized, barely able to make eye contact. Grace recognized herself in their fear. She gathered them in the main classroom on their first day. Welcome to Freedom Canyon School, she said. You're here because terrible things happened to you. Things that weren't your fault. Things that tried to break you. But you survived. And now you get to decide what comes next. The girls stared at her, uncertain. Here's what won't happen at this school, Grace continued. Nobody will hit you. Nobody will sell you. Nobody will tell you you're worthless, or that you deserved what happened. Nobody will control who you talk to, what you read, what you think. And if anyone tries to do those things, you tell me or Mr. Hayes and we'll stop them." One girl, maybe 16 with haunted eyes, raised her hand. "What will happen here?" "You'll learn," Grace said. "Reading, writing, mathematics, law. How to defend yourself physically and legally. How to think critically. How to make choices based on what you want, not what others tell you to want. You'll heal. You'll grow stronger. And when you're ready, you'll leave here with skills and knowledge that make you independent. That's the goal, making you independent, not dependent. Free, not controlled." Another girl spoke up, voice barely a whisper. "Why?" "Why what?" Grace asked gently. "Why help us? What do you want from us?" Grace pulled up her sleeve, showing the scar from the bullet graze. "Because I was you. My father sold me to traffickers. A man named Colton Hayes, my husband, intercepted that sale and gave me safety, time, and choices. I healed. I grew strong. And now I want to give you what he gave me. Not because I want something from you, but because you deserve it. Every human being deserves safety, dignity, and freedom. That's why." The girl started crying. Then all three were crying, and Grace knelt down and held them while they sobbed out months or years of pain and fear. Miss Crawford joined her, and together they let these girls mourn what had been stolen from them. Later that night, Grace and Hayes sat on their porch watching the sun set over the canyon. "3 girls," Grace said. "It's a start." "Wade says he's got leads on 5 more, Hayes replied. "And Margaret's funding can support up to 20 students. We'll grow, Grace. This is just the beginning." "I keep thinking about the ones we can't save," Grace admitted. "The 2 from my father's sales who are still missing. All the others out there right now trapped and suffering. 3 girls is wonderful, but it feels like such a small number against so much evil." Hayes took her hand. "You can't save everyone. Nobody can. But you can save these 3. Give them futures they wouldn't have had otherwise. That matters, Grace. It matters to them." "I know," Grace said. "I just wish I could do more." "You will," Hayes said. "One girl at a time. One future at a time. That's how you change the world, not all at once, but steadily, persistently refusing to give up, even when the evil seems overwhelming." The school grew over the following years. More girls arrived, some from Wade Morrison's rescues, others from a growing network of sheriffs and marshals who learned about Freedom Canyon School and sent survivors there. Grace and Miss Crawford taught them all, watching frightened, broken girls transform into confident young women who understood their own worth. Some students stayed a few months, others a few years. All left with education skills and the unshakable knowledge that they were valuable human beings deserving of respect. Grace tracked their progress with pride. One became a teacher herself, another a legal secretary, a third opened a dress shop. They built lives on their own terms, lives they chose. Hayes found his purpose too, not just in protecting the school, but in training older students in self-defense, and when they were ready, in helping with rescue operations. He taught them what he'd taught Grace, not just how to fight, but when to fight, how to protect themselves without becoming what had hurt them. Violence isn't strength, he'd tell them. Real strength is choosing violence only when necessary to protect yourself or others, and then choosing to put it down again afterward. Don't let what you've survived turn you into something you hate. Grace watched him with these girls, patient, gentle, never raising his voice or touching without permission, and saw the boy he'd been the one who'd survived the lumber camp by becoming hard. He was teaching them what he'd had to teach himself, that survival didn't require sacrificing your humanity. 5 years after the school opened, Grace stood in the main classroom teaching a lesson on contract law to a group of 12 students. She was 24 now, confident in her role, comfortable in her own skin, in ways she'd never imagined possible. "Remember," she told her students, "a contract requires 2 parties willingly agreeing to terms. If someone forces you to sign something through threat, coercion, or deception, that contract isn't valid. You have the right to refuse. You have the right to say no. And anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. A new student, just 13, recently rescued from a situation Grace didn't let herself think about too much, raised her hand. But what if they're bigger, stronger? What if saying no gets you hurt? Grace set down her chalk. Then you say no anyway, and you fight back and you survive. And then you heal. I know that's not the answer you want. You want me to say, there's a magic solution that makes it safe and easy. But there isn't. Sometimes the choice is between bad and worse, and you pick bad because at least you survive it. But here's the important part. Surviving it doesn't make you broken. It makes you a survivor. Those are different things. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Did you say no? When it happened to you? Grace moved closer, kneeling down so they were eye level. My father sold me before I understood I could say no. But when the men who bought me came to collect, I fought them. I killed some of them. I said no with bullets and blood, and I survived. That survival made everything after possible, this school, this life, the future I'm building. So, yes, I said no. And I'm glad I did. The girl nodded slowly, processing this. After class, Hayes found Grace in their private quarters. The original cabin expanded and improved over the years. Good lesson, he said. She needed to hear it, Grace replied. They all do. Nobody ever told me I had the right to refuse to fight back. I want them to know from the beginning. Hayes pulled her close. You're changing lives every day. You know that, right? We're changing lives, Grace corrected. This is our work, our school, our purpose. Together. Together, Hayes agreed. They stood there for a moment, two people who'd survived impossible things and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Grace thought about the girl she'd been 19, terrified, sold like property. That girl felt like a stranger, now someone from another life. A knock interrupted the moment. One of the older students, 17, about to graduate, stood at the door. Grace. There's someone here to see you. Says her name is Rebecca. Says you knew her father. Grace's stomach dropped. Rebecca. One of the missing girls from her father's sales. The one who'd been taken 2 months before Grace. They'd been searching for her for 5 years with no success. Grace ran to the main building, Hayes right behind her. In the entryway stood a young woman, maybe 21, painfully thin, with scars visible on her arms and haunted eyes that Grace recognized all too well. Rebecca? Grace asked. The young woman nodded. You're Grace Whitmore, the Reverend's daughter. I was, Grace said carefully. Now I'm Grace Hayes. But yes, Samuel Whitmore was my father. Rebecca's legs seemed to give out. Grace caught her, supporting her weight. I'm sorry, Rebecca whispered. I shouldn't have come, but I heard about this school, about what you're doing, and I hoped. You're safe here, Grace said firmly. Whatever you've been through, whatever you've survived, you're safe now. We'll help you. That's what we do. Rebecca started crying, and Grace held her while she sobbed. Over Rebecca's shoulder, Grace met Hayes's eyes. He nodded, understanding. This was why they'd built the school, for moments exactly like this. They took Rebecca to the medical room, where Miss Crawford, who'd trained in basic nursing, examined her injuries. She'd been held by the Morrisons for 3 months before being sold to a brothel in Montana. She'd been there for nearly 5 years before managing to escape. How did you find us? Grace asked gently. Sheriff Morrison, Rebecca said. I made it to his office 2 weeks ago, told him my story. He said you'd want to know I was alive, and that you could help me start over. We can, Grace said. We will. You'll stay here as long as you need. Learn, heal, figure out what comes next. No pressure, no timeline, just safety and choices. Rebecca looked around at the school, at the students visible through windows, at Grace and Hayes and Miss Crawford. I can't believe this exists. that someone actually helps girls like us. "We exist because of girls like you," Grace said. "You survived 5 years in hell. That takes incredible strength. Now let us give you tools to use that strength building a future." Rebecca stayed at the school for 2 years, healing slowly, learning, gradually rebuilding herself piece by piece. Grace watched her progress with fierce pride, another life reclaimed, another future secured. Rebecca eventually became a teacher herself, staying at the school to help other survivors the way she'd been helped. More years passed. The school's reputation grew. Students graduated and went on to build meaningful lives. Some returned to teach, creating a cycle of healing and empowerment. Grace and Hayes grew older together, their partnership deepening into something profound and unshakable. They had 2 children, a daughter named Sarah and a son named Wade, after the sheriff who'd helped them so much. Grace taught her children what she taught her students, that people had inherent worth, regardless of gender, that freedom was something you defended fiercely, that survival could lead to beautiful things if you had courage and support. Sarah grew up fierce and opinionated, challenging everything. Wade grew up gentle and thoughtful, considering all angles before deciding. Both learned to shoot, to think critically, to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Both understood that their parents' story was tragic and beautiful in equal measure, that terrible things had happened and good things had grown from the ashes. On Grace's 40th birthday, the school held a celebration. Current and former students gathered, nearly 100 women whose lives had been changed by Freedom Canyon School. They shared stories, memories, gratitude. One former student stood and spoke for all of them. "Grace taught me that surviving wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. She taught me I had value, rights, power. She taught me that what happened to me was wrong, but it didn't make me wrong. Everything I am now, everything I've built exists because she refused to accept that girls like us were disposable. So thank you, Grace. For seeing us. For fighting for us. For teaching us to fight for ourselves." Grace stood to respond, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being brave enough to heal. For doing the hard work of building new lives. For refusing to let what hurt you define you. You're all proof that people can survive terrible things and still have beautiful futures. That's not just my work, that's yours. Every choice you made to keep going, keep trying, keep believing you deserved better. That's the real courage." That evening, Grace and Hayes sat on their porch as the sun set, their children playing nearby, the sounds of the school settling in for the night, drifting across the canyon. "Do you ever regret it?" Hayes asked. "This life. It's been hard rebuilding from trauma, facing down traffickers, fighting for every girl we've saved. Sometimes I wonder if you would have been happier with something easier." Grace looked at him. This man who'd saved her life and then taught her to save herself. "Never. Not once. This life, our life, matters. We've changed things, Hayes. Really changed them. Those 100 women at the party today. They're living free. Because we refused to accept that trafficking and abuse were just how things are. We said no to that. We built an alternative. That's worth every hard moment." "Even the really hard ones?" Hayes asked, thinking about the battles they'd fought over the years, both physical battles against traffickers who'd tried to shut down the school and emotional battles with survivors too damaged to heal completely. "Especially the really hard ones," Grace said. "That's where growth happens, in the struggle, in refusing to give up even when it seems impossible." She took his hand. "You taught me that. That morning at the trading post when you stepped between me and my father. When you said, 'She's mine now,' but meant, 'She's free now.' You taught me that one person refusing to accept evil can make a difference. And we've spent 20 years proving that's true." Hayes squeezed her hand. "We've spent 20 years proving you were right. That survival is just the beginning. That broken people can heal. That freedom is worth fighting for. You were right about all of it, Grace." "We were right," Grace corrected. "Together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, listening to the sounds of the school, their purpose, their legacy. Grace thought about the terrified girl she'd been, the one who'd believed she was worthless, powerless, owned. That girl had been wrong about everything except one crucial thing. She'd believed she deserved better, even when she couldn't articulate what better looked like. And she'd been right. She had deserved better. Every girl deserved better. Every person deserved safety, dignity, choice freedom. Grace had built a life proving that truth, one student at a time, one rescue at a time, one healed heart at a time. It wasn't the life her father had planned for her. It was infinitely better than anything he could have imagined. Because it was hers, chosen, freely built, intentionally lived, courageously. Years later, when Grace and Hayes were laid to rest on the ridge overlooking the canyon, the school they'd built continued operating, run by former students who'd learned from them and carried forward their mission. The funeral drew hundreds: students, sheriffs, judges, reformers, people whose lives had been touched by Grace's courage and Hayes's protection. The headstone was simple, carved with words Grace had chosen herself years earlier. Grace Whitmore Hayes. She was sold as property, but lived as proof that freedom is something you fight for, not something you're given. She taught hundreds that survival is the beginning, not the end. And beside hers, Hayes's stone read, Colton Hayes. He survived by becoming hard, then learned that real strength is gentleness. He protected those who couldn't protect themselves and called it privilege, not burden. The school became legend throughout the territories, a place where broken girls became strong women, where trauma transformed into purpose, where the answer to evil was persistent, practical good. Students graduated and spread across the country, carrying with them the lessons Grace had taught: that people are never property, that freedom is worth defending, that love means choice, not control. And in quiet moments, when new students arrived, terrified and traumatized, teachers would tell them Grace's story, how she'd been sold by her father, saved by a killer, and transformed herself into someone who saved others. How she'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and used it as fuel to prevent it happening to countless others. They'd tell these girls that survival wasn't weakness, that trauma didn't define them, that they could still have beautiful lives if they were brave enough to build them. They'd tell them what Grace had learned that morning at the trading post when Hayes said, "Nobody owns you," that freedom was an internal state before it was an external one, that the most important choice was to keep choosing yourself, keep believing you deserved better, keep fighting for the life you wanted, even when the world said you were worth nothing. Because Grace Whitmore Hayes had proven that even when you're sold like property, you can still choose dignity, justice, and love. And those choices change everything.